Well, that's why I had to have somebody who was a bigger Bond fan than me because like I like Bond, like I'm not like somebody who's like doesn't like it, but I've never been like obsessed with it, or like a huge like Bond or like I know some fan like the fandom and shit around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you told me you were an autist, a Bond autist, I was like, oh, this has to happen,
Yeah.
Yeah, I rewatched that movie, and I was like, man, and I kind of got confused for a split second because it was like when I was looking it up, and it was on Max, like all that shit was on like Max right now. I think they have like the whole Bond series up there, and I was like, damn, there's a lot of those, but like I forgot that it was like 2006 and that it was the first Craig Bond.
Yes.
And that there was
2006. That's so long ago.
Yeah. And there was that fucking parody or something of it that came out in like 1967. I was looking up last night. I was like, hold on. Did I miss something?
Yeah, that's not very good. And there's a version which I've not seen, which is a TV version. It was on CBS in the late 50s. But they make him an American agent in that called Jim Bond.
Jim. That's the American. Hey, Jim. The nickname, yeah. All right, awesome, yeah. Anything goes, fair game. It's kind of nerdy, so I'm going to go with, like, book first, right? And I like to, for this podcast, I always say, like, what book or what version you read. And I'm interested in yours, too, because you have a bunch of classic versions of this novel, right? Like 60s and 70s, 50s versions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of different versions. They're actually up in the loft at the moment. Yeah, for this one I did the audiobook, although I made sure to get the 2007 audiobook to not be not the censored one. I don't know if they have censored this one in particular. But...
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Okay. So this is another episode of Heavy Bored. I'm Andrew Wittstadt, and I'm joined today by a very special guest who goes by the Nani State, at the Nani State, and is the mastermind behind the musical project Wrong Circles, available on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your music. Nani State, welcome.
Hello, nice, thanks for having me.
Of course. I've been looking forward to this since we planned it, where I was just like, that announcement on the Bond shit where they're like, trying to, I guess I call it whitewashing. I mean, like, yeah, censor and whitewash all this kind of old novels and shit. And then we started talking, and I was like, okay, I got to start doing some Bond shit. Hopefully, go through the whole series eventually. But
it's still intact. We have to cover it. Before they hide it from us.
And I want to get to that eventually too. That fucking the censorship and stuff. Like, I don't know. Because it's so hard to read those articles, like what they're actually censoring. I read some of the Roald Dahl stuff, and I was like, I can't stomach this shit. Like, I can't read any more of this to see like what they're changing and like the Bond stuff. Although I was pointing out, like, I'm like, are they changing like sexism stuff or like some of his like misogynist like remarks and stuff? I think
they took a lot of N-words out of Live and Let Die. Right. I think there's because it's full on like one of the chapter titles has just got it bang in the middle. I think that they excised that. But yeah, I've not looked into quite what the level of the changes are, because it doesn't really matter. Like if once you've started changing one part of it, then it's all fair game, isn't it? So that's why important to read them while you still can.
Exactly. We are here, listeners, to correct the record on James Bond. But I wanted to start this out, Nani State, with just like your background a little bit with like with Bond as a reader, all that kind of stuff. Were you always a big reader as a kid growing up? What got you into Bond, all that kind of shit? Yeah.
So Bond, the first experience of Bond would have been watching, I think, like the last half hour of For Your Eyes Only, and then a couple of years later my dad sort of properly introduced him to Bond, because he's a massive Bond fan and has been since he was a little kid, And I had some of the books on tape when I was a kid. I had Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever on tape, read by Joanna Lumley. And I used to listen to those over and over again. And then when I was a bit older, going away on holiday to France, I'd read the Bond Pan paperbacks on holiday, and so just went through all of them. But yeah, I'm a huge Bond fan. And particularly of the Bond books, because it's not an area of Bond that gets discussed that much. And I think the portrayal of Bond is very different in the books, and it's not what people think of when they think of James Bond, and particularly in this book as well. I think in Casino Royale, it's it's a very different Bond to what people think of.
Yeah, I want to get to that too in terms of like the cultural, like this guy, like this character that became bigger than life, like the James Bond character. But you were saying your dad was a big Bond guy. Were you a boomer dad, right? We're kind of around the same age.
Gen X.
Gen X dad, okay, yeah. My parents were always older, yeah. And I had like boomer parents, and my dad was, I mean, every person that grew up in that era, like, you idolized James Bond. Like,
yes, absolutely, yeah. It's it's the first British action hero, really, like that goes worldwide. Like, there's sort of boys' adventure stories before that stuff, but it's the first. Yeah, it's probably the first British action hero, and still one of the only ones, really. But,
yeah, that's incredible. Like, just like the capture that like this character. And we talk about on this podcast all the time because, we're writing a book podcast, but we are talking movies here today too, listeners. But it's just like this character of James Bond, and like us coming to it even like, decades after it was first introduced, and just the grip it's had on like the kind of all spies are based around James Bond, like after 1953 or whatever, when this book came out, like every spy is based on this guy now.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's the default, isn't it? It's, and I think every man sort of compares himself to James Bond as well. It's it's one of it's a true masculine archetype, isn't it? His figure.
Yeah, I want to get to that too. That this, like, I would say, and I want to hear what you think about this. Where I said Bond is the most kind of iconic, and I would also say like important spy character of the 20th century. I mean, maybe even ever. But like, I just wanted to. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. He's the default spy. When people think of spies, they're thinking of James Bond, and it's all that. It's all there in this book as well. Like everything that you would associate with, the dossier being delivered with all the breakdowns of the different people that he's going to be meeting and what their involvement are, and the car chase. Like everything that you would think of in a spy novel is all contained in this novel.
Yeah, and it was the first introduction, so that's what always, like, whenever I read a book like this, and because I'm a millennial, and this fucking shit, when I was introduced to Bond, like the first Bond I knew was, Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, like the 90s James Bond. And then like I had never read any of the books, and then reading this book, listeners, I didn't even get into it. It was a newer edition that came out in 2012 here, but the original edition was published in 1953, I believe.
Yeah.
The first time. And of course, you will find these types of paperbacks all over the world in used bookstores, nice patinaed pages. Like Nani State showed me a few pictures of his collection. He's got nice, like classic paperbacks with that yellowed pages and crinkled corners and all that.
They smell great as well. They've got sort of rye ergot sort of smell to them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, who is that writer that said that? He said like new books smell great. It's like old books smell even better, like ancient Egypt or something.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure.
Was it like Bradbury or somebody? I think it was like a sci-fi guy that was like something. Like
that.
It
sounds like it could be Bradbury.
But yeah, this is fucking great, man. And I was thinking like, okay, and this was the first time this iconic character, like you already heard us say it, listeners, this iconic character was brought to life. And I'm sure Fleming had no idea about how big this would be at this point in his life. And I guess this was kind of the end of Fleming's life too. We didn't even really talk about Fleming and like him being an icon in his own right.
Yeah, so he'd been in naval intelligence beforehand, and sort of Bond is I think the idealized version of Fleming. It's he shares a lot of his traits, but also he goes much further than Fleming ever did. It's it's a great introduction to him as a character. I think like it's one of the only Bond books that starts with him already on the mission. Almost all the other ones start with him going to meet M, but he's right in the middle. And I love that he does that thing that I think all men do in the very opening scene where he's looking at the bank clerks behind the desk of the casino, and he's thinking, "Oh, how would you rob it? If would you need three? You need three guys with guns. Then it's like constantly casing the joint, constantly sort of thinking about what would happen if I had to spring into action right now."
Yeah, that's fucking great. And also, I was thinking, and this book isn't super gadget heavy, but I was thinking like the gadgets, like the importance of like the spies having these gadgets that probably don't exist, right? They're make-believe gadgets, like the watches and stuff. I mean, Pierce Brosnan just had like a fucking watch or something in those 90s Bonds, and then like some devices. And I guess this was the 50s, so the tech wasn't what we would consider today, but it was still like the most advanced tech you could get. And I was just thinking like, yeah, like we start getting this 1950s tech right away, where he's getting like this kind of rundown of this is what you can do, this is what you can use, cyanide tooth caps or whatever. Like this is
just one that's got a button that's potassium cyanide, isn't it? And there's two like there's the camera cases in it as well, that sort of trick bomb camera cases, and yeah, it's all quite grounded at the beginning. It remains quite grounded throughout the books. It doesn't veer into science fiction territory as much as the films ever do.
Yeah, that's what I noticed when I was rewatching the film last night. We're talking just Casino Royale listeners, but there's no rules. We're going to be going all over the place with Bond and shit and the culture. But I was noticing that too, because they had like that huge like hour-long intro to it, basically, in the movie in 2006. That like doesn't really start off like the book does, and whatever, right? Like you have to take some creative license when you're adapting a novel into a different form, but like, yeah. There is like less of that in the movie version a little bit.
Yeah, it's it's quite brief, the book, really, in terms of but not only is it very short, but it's very few scenes really. So the whole book is happening maybe in sort of 7 scenes, maybe. Like it's really just him being introduced, him at the casino, the card game, the torture scene, the bit at the end. Really, that's the whole book. It's considering how sprawling the James Bond adventures are on screen, and some of the later ones, how they're hopping between countries and stuff. This really is like almost a play, isn't it? It's happening over just a few scenes.
I noticed that too, and that's something I want to say too. Just how, not just like how simple the plot is. Like it's kind of crazy that it's about like a fucking card game. Like most of the fucking book, like the first 100 pages are about a card game, essentially.
Yeah.
And then like,
have you done Moonraker yet? Have you read Moonraker?
I've read the first
that takes the card games to another. At least Baccarat, you can sort of get your head around what's going on in the card game, but yeah, the bridge stuff in Moonraker. Oh.
Yeah, and I don't know how to play cards at all. Yeah, I don't know how to play like any fucking card games. Blackjack, maybe.
Of course, in the film they make it Texas Hold'em, which is obviously much more understandable to your average audience member, but significantly less classy than playing Baccarat.
Yeah. I did notice that too.
Yeah,
they made it like a poker game instead of But I was thinking like, yeah, like okay, it's really simple, and these were like, it's incredibly clean too, just like the writing. Like Fleming didn't add any extra flourishes. He didn't like do these little stylistic like quirks or anything. He was incredibly clean. You can tell he loved Hemingway. You can tell he loved all these great guys. He was reading them, and I guess he basically set the template for a spy novel too. I guess there were like pulp novels and stuff before that and all that, but
it's very almost reads like a telegram at points, and like, but then he'll occasionally sneak a phrase there. Like a lot of it isn't very flowery, but then he has like that. There's in halfway through Casino Royale, there's a line about the hands of a clock stumbled their way through the afternoon. You just have a little time. Oh, Waxy! Oh, you're a better writer than you seem. Yeah, but his the style is like that early scene where Bond goes back to his hotel room and he wants to check if it's been disturbed, and it just like the way he just goes through that list of all the different things. He's scratched a little bit on the cistern of his toilet to see if the water's changed at all. It's there, and he's put like one of his black hairs across the drawer of the dresser to see if it's been disturbed. And It's so well conveyed by Fleming in his prose.
It's like, and it's like those classic little like simple like almost. I guess I read an interesting essay once by Ross McDonald, and I'm a big pulp guy. I know you and I have talked a little bit about classic pulp novels and stuff, just chatting and stuff online, and it was like he always said it went back to Poe. Like McDonald would always argue that like those simple kind of hide the document behind the drawer type thing like went back to some early like Purloined Letter, like Edgar Allan Poe stuff. I mean, I don't know if how true that is or not, but I was like, oh, that's interesting theory. That's the kind of those simple, just little spy tricks. Notch the toilet, right? Notch the thing. Put a hair over the lock. Tape the book to the underside behind. Pull the drawer out, tape the book underneath, and put it back in or whatever. And
yeah. No, it's wonderful, and it's proper spycraft, isn't it? Again, it's like no gadgets. It's all stuff that you could do if you wanted to stay in the hotel and you wanted to check if it had been disturbed. It's the average reader could start trying that out tomorrow.
And there's like that final part too, where there's like that fucking with the check when they're looking for the check and they can't find it and they rip the room to shreds looking for the check, and then he's just like, oh yeah, I hid it like behind the placard of the numbers on the outside of the room or whatever.
Yes,
like
brilliant.
It just. So simple, but yeah, like it's just like the Purloined Letter, like what was that? They like put it in plain sight, right? Like hide it in plain sight, like it's just a normal letter, and then nobody thinks that it's hidden, and they can't find it all of a sudden. Yeah. Damn, I have so many things that I want to touch on before we even get to like specifics in the book and shit. But I was just like, fuck, Bond girls. I want to talk to you about that, the importance of the Bond girls and the movies. Like we talked a little bit, but like the movies, the cultural impact of that. The hot girls, like
so this is the original one, and this one with Vesper Lind, who like I think Fleming's Bond girls are they're definitely stronger characters than the Bond girls in the films are. They're not bimbos. Like a lot of them are secret agents or are come from a sort of life of crime or sort of come from the streets. So they're all a lot tougher than you think of when you think of a Bond girl. Well, also all obviously being beautiful and sort of slightly fetishistic. They're not damsels in distress most of the time.
They're usually partners. Yeah, like they usually help. Like he needs them in most of the plots, and I guess he falls in love with them too. But yeah.
Yes, I highlight. There's this quote here. He says. He was quite honest to himself about the hypocrisy of his attitude towards her. As a woman, he wanted to sleep with her, but only when the job had been done.
Yes. I think I highlighted that exact fucking phrase too, like on the my version where my first introduction, and like I said, I was a Pierce Brosnan Bond. Like when you're born in like the fucking 90s, and then you go like, oh, the Bond movie, it's just Pierce Brosnan doing all of it. My first one was, I think, what was it, like Tomorrow Never Dies or whatever with the Halle Berry.
That's his. No, that's Die Another Day with Halle Berry.
Die Another Day. That was the one I remember first, because I just remember that scene with Halle Berry coming out of the ocean and like her tits and just like this kind of like, I remember being like, like a 10, 13-year-old boy just be like, oh my God. this woman is so hot.
The sex scene where he's feeding her olives.
And it became like
my favorite
bit
of Die Another Day is when he. Yes, definitely. My favorite bit in Die Another Day is when he uses that guy in the wheelchair as a distraction. He just grabs a guy in the wheelchair and just pushes him into a hole.
God damn. Because that too, like a lot of listeners probably know this and stuff, but like there were only like 14. I think Fleming wrote 14 novels with Bond.
That sounds about right. Yes.
And there's 27 movies I think that have been made since like the 60s.
Yeah, and quite a lot of them don't share much in common with the books or beyond the titles. Like the first few sort of Connery ones are sort of faithful, and then they just go off off the rails.
Are you a Connery purist? Sure.
No, not a purist. I think there's something to be said for all eras of Bond. I think I love a lot of the Connery runs, but also Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun. They're both fantastic, and they've all the Bonds have got something that they bring to it.
Yeah, I know that's a contested thing, at least on when you're online and shit. Do you ever? I like The Critical Drinker, that guy who reviews movies on YouTube. He's like Scottish.
Oh yes.
he did like a great thing. I think it was like a year ago or so, where he just went through all the different Bond iterations and kind of ranked them. You know, it's all his opinion, like how he thinks. But I didn't know. I know everybody has strong opinions about which Bond is the real Bond. You know, like the.
In terms of the best, the best of the films, I think, is From Russia with Love as an actual film, just as the best film. My favorite is You Only Live Twice.
God, yeah, my dad was always the one that got me. You know, I remember watching Doctor No. When all like the DVD re-releases were happening, like, and my dad would like, we'd get them for like Father's Day or some bullshit, you know, like, oh, here's a DVD version that we already have on VHS or whatever it is, and then like, I just remember watching it on the couch. Yeah,
You Only Live Twice was one of the first 3 DVDs that we got. I remember when the Christmas that my dad bought a DVD player. It was You Only Live Twice, Spinal Tap, and a collection of 4 Twilight Zone episodes were the first three DVDs that we ever had. And the Only Live Twice one was like an interactive menu, which I've never seen before. It was like the volcano opening up as the menu of the DVD.
That's fucking awesome. Yeah. DVD menus. I know there's like a nostalgia factor online. Everybody brings it up all the time. But yeah, there was something to that. Like some cool DVD menus and shit. The music that would kick on and shit, and like it would be like soundtrack music, and yeah, that was fucking great.
Yeah,
fucking great. But we talked a little bit about this, just chatting back and forth when we were prepping for this, and about like the decadent food. There's like an emphasis on food, and Bond even goes out of his way to explain to like Vesper at one point like why he eats this like fancy food.
Yes, it makes a point of telling her that you always need to order extra toast when you're getting caviar, because they always bring enough caviar but they don't bring enough toast. It's like, it's like not only is he, you know, it's that thing, he's always already familiar with all of this sort of fancy food. It's not, you know, he's not impressed by it. He's already sort of customizing, saying, well, I'll bring extra toast, please.
The champagne stuff, like he's constantly talking about the champagne and how they need it, and pre-dinner cocktails, post-dinner cocktails, you know, the champagne with the meal.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, the food is a huge part. It's only a little bit in this one, but some of the later ones it gets ridiculous descriptions of meals. But yeah, like you know, this is, he says 53. This one came out, so this is like a year or two before rationing ends in the UK. So at that point, like you still have rationing. So there's only you're only allowed a certain amount of meat per week. You're only allowed a certain amount of dairy per week, and you have to like trade in your coupons at the shop. And so the idea of just all this sort of luxurious food is like, you know, people vicariously enjoying that through the book, because like nobody in Britain's getting caviar and toast at that point. And you know, it's about 20 years before people that are taking trips to Europe and stuff, so that most people have never left the country. Most people have never been to the south coast of France. So they almost act like travelogues for the reader, like describing these food and this locales and yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Nani brought this up to me, and I was like, oh shit, like I didn't even consider that, you know, like and reading it, you know, going backwards and reading something from 1953 now, it doesn't even click with me. But then when you said that like, yeah, like this was actually, you know, keep in mind that there was still rationing going on post World War II, basically, all because, I mean, people always forget that too. I mean, you know, fucking parts of the UK just leveled after, you know, rubble at the end there. So there was all these cities that had to be rebuilt. Like there was no, like going to the grocery store, and it just, yeah. So I never even thought of that. So I was like, yeah, fuck, that's important. And I think that's true for most novels. Like, you know, like Bond, everybody wants to do like these feminist theory or something against Bond or whatever, but like it is a fantasy, you know, like, and even something as simple, like you said, like rich foods, decadent foods like caviars and these champagnes, and even the locales, like, you know, the vacation regions of France and shit that they're supposed to be in. And it's just, it is a fantasy, you know. I think people forget about fiction.
It's supposed to be sumptuous, isn't it? You're supposed to be taking it all in. Yeah, no, I think it's very easy to look down on Bond, but
oh yeah, because and you mentioned this too, like when it's easy to look down on him. We were chatting about it. You said something about how he's actually kind of a cruel character, and that I was like, ooh, that's pretty true. Right? Like,
yeah, certainly in the books he is. I think it is. Although I'd also noticed in this when I was rereading it that describes him laughing quite a lot of times in the book, which is not something that you get much of in Bond in the books or the films. But he laughs quite a lot in this. But yeah, I think in general he has a cruelty and as much as there is a continuity between the books, you could see this one as maybe the start of a lot of that cruelty, that he does open himself up a bit in this book, and then he gets immediately it goes very, very wrong for him. But yeah, there is a cruelty and a detachment from stuff that Bond has that I think is which I think Daniel Craig captures quite well, probably better than any of the other Bonds have.
That's interesting. Yeah. That kind of, because there is this kind of, and I guess it is masculine, like the kind of cruelty, or just like when you're living that spy life, right? Like you have to be able to move, and that's always like a trope in spy movies. I've been watching a lot. I've been rewatching all the Mission Impossible movies before I go see the new one, and I was just like thinking the same thing there, right? Where like in the third movie, it starts to be a huge plot line of like, you can't have normal relationships because you're a fucking spy, dude. Like you're putting your life at risk every time you take a job. And then, you know, you have to lie to your significant other. Like there's no like being honest and open. Like you're a government spy. Like you can't even tell them who you really are in some cases.
And you're constantly having to use people as well and sacrifice people and stuff. And yes, I think that. Yeah, I think you get a glimpse of that cruelty in this one. Oh.
And like the sleeping with factor, like you put it out, I guess that quote about, like he wanted to sleep with her right away, but only when the job was done. Like this kind of the male, there is something to that. You know, it's always like a thing in literature. It's a thing in poems and stuff where people, like you fall in love with people you just met or whatever, and there's no particular reason or not. And I guess everybody does this, but when men do it particularly, like it's very hard and fast kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, there's that great description where he talks about they're talking with Vesper, and I think is it Mathis, the other spy, and he talks about constantly glancing over to her and gesturing to her to include her in the conversation. But each time he does, he's taking in another glance of her, and he's trying to sort of deduce more about her and sort of take in more of her visage. Yeah, it's a really nice description of when you meet someone that really grasps your attention.
And like the dress, when he's commenting on her dress, like how great it looks, and he's like, "Oh no, we have to order caviar in that dress," like kind of like
yes.
You know, that you gotta use it properly. Look at how great you look, kind of thing. Yeah. But that'll keep coming up, listeners, just because it's such an important, you know, because sex is a part of this, and it's part of that fantasy. I guess it's a particularly male fantasy, but you know, people could, you know, women could still participate in it too, where there's just like that, yeah, like this suave guy in these great fucking suits, like eating caviar and having these like women throw themselves at him and him banging them and and then saving the world at the same time. He gets all of it. Gets the cake and gets to eat it too, right? It's a fantasy.
Although in this one he's not saving the world, is he? He's bankrupting a union. That's his actual mission. There's a trade union in Europe, and they think they're being funded by the Russians, so his job is to bankrupt. fighting the good fight.
Yeah. Oh fuck yeah! One small thing I kept noticing is the cold showers. The cold showers.
Oh yeah, a hot bath followed by a cold shower. That's what he takes.
And I was like, well, what's up with the cold showers? Like, why the cold showers? I know is that just like an old thing? Like,
yeah, I guess in the morning it wakes you up, doesn't it? And I guess it's probably good for the skin. But I think also there's probably a masochistic element for Bond. It's, you know.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah, it's like a tough guy type. I can take it. Like this is how I'm ready. Like,
you know, that probably serves him well when he's getting tortured later on. That he's sort of, you know, he's bracing himself every morning with a cold shower.
And I did wonder, because I remember my grandfather, R.I.P., he died many years ago, but I remember him always talking about cold showers in the morning. I don't know if it was just some, you know, guys from that era, like you know, he would have been. I guess Bond would technically be a little older than my grandfather would have been in that time, although I think in the 50s, my grandfather was probably in his 30s, 40s, but it was like, the cold showers were just like a part of it. Like he would always say, like every morning he would start really hot and then go as cold as it'll go, like kind of thing at the end of the shower, but just to like wake himself up. And I'm just like, is that just like a 1950s like thing that people were doing? Like, Or is it supposed to be this kind of, yeah, Bond's a tough guy. He can take a little cold water, you know, like dipping your toe in the pool. Fuck that. Put the cold water right over your head, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I was
Definitely.
just like, and it keeps coming up. Like he keeps mentioning that like he's doing these cold showers. Like, it was a cold shower, you know? It was cold. None of this warm stuff. Yeah.
So did you want to go through what the events?
I did. I wanted the card game, especially since that's like the main plot. Like
Yes,
the significance of it. Like, what do you think of it? Like in terms of, you know, why is this card game the most of the plot, really?
Yeah, I suppose it's obviously something that Fleming's really into. He's obviously very into cards, and so for him, it's very exciting. I think I would say that the card game in the book is more exciting than the card game in the film. I think in the film, it stops and starts so many times. By the time you get to the climactic part of the card game in the film, you've already had that sort of climax happen twice already. Whereas it's fairly sort of in the book, it sort of just comes to one big crescendo.
Yeah, I think in the book it's described as like 4 hours or something, right? Like 4 or 5 hour game that they have a few breaks in the middle of, but then not like in the movie. It almost makes it seem like it lasts a couple days, like. And he has all this time in between. His car and changes clothes a bunch of times.
Do you have any familiarity with Baccarat before reading this?
I have no idea. Even after reading it, I was still a little like, wait a minute. So how do you score these cards? Like, how many points are these worth? Like, so 9s aren't worth 9. They're like kind of like. I was like, okay. But yeah, I was just thinking too. It's almost. I guess it's kind of funny too when you look back, like the government's. Because he concludes it with the MI6, like, you know, the British intelligence, and then with the CIA, the American intelligence apparatuses, and they're like giving up millions, like they're like giving him millions of dollars to risk on a card game, like, you know, like it's like
just because he's the best gambler, like I like that. Also, they don't try and use any of their spycraft in the casino. It's just like, no, he's just really good at cards. He just, you know.
He is. But I was thinking that too. Like I was like, okay, what's the significance of it? Like, why? How does a card game become like the main focus of a fucking spy novel? And I was thinking, okay, risk, right? Like it shows that there's balls, this kind of risk. Like they're risking millions of dollars, government dollars, to do this. Like kind of, and he loses it at one point too. You know, like that's
and the CIA have to bail him out.
And it's like it's bold. It's fucking it could fail, right? Like he's taking chances, and it's kind of like. You don't even think about it where you're like, oh, it's just a card game. But then it's like, yeah, they're actually banking so much on this card game. Like you said, just for the skill level of this one spy that they have, you know, an arsenal of spies. Very Cold War, I guess? Or is it just supposed to show like the ballsiness, the attitude, the kind of like, yeah, this is what intelligence agencies do. Is like sometimes we do risk it all, like 25 mil on a fucking card game because that's the only way to do it, you know, that kind of thing. Or I don't know. I was just fascinated. Yeah, your thoughts. Yeah.
It is an odd mission when you think about it for especially given how grand some of the Bond plots will get later on, how that it's you're going to go to France and you're going to bankrupt the Union by playing a card game against a really reckless man. It's quite small stakes globally despite being high stakes financially. It feels like if Bond loses all their money, nothing really changed. The Cold War pretty much carries on as it would otherwise.
Yeah, that is crazy too. Like the stakes escalate, and you mentioned it already too. Like this is the shortest of the Bond books. I think this is less than 200 pages in my version. I guess it depends which paperback version you get printing, but I noticed the other ones. This one's under 200 pages in my version, but. I noticed like Moonraker and then like Live and Let Die and like the following novels are all a little bit longer. They start to get a little bit longer as the plots start to get a little bit more high stakes. You know, then you get to Moonraker where like the whole world's at stake. You know, he's saving the world. Marvel movie. You know, like.
And the amount of locations in each one starts increasing as well. And also I think with this one, the sort of spy part of the plot finishes quite a bit before the actual book ends. That's it's a fair chunk at the end of just him and Vesper. After the there's not really a climactic climactic battle with a final villain.
That's one thing I noticed too. Yeah, like the villain is almost like a comedy character in this novel, because then some of the later novels they're much more serious and much more sinister. But like,
There's almost something a bit pathetic about him, isn't he? Like when they're going through the dossier and this sort of thing, they invested in all these brothels, and then a month later the French outlawed brothels, and he lost all his money, and now he's sort of gambling, and he seems so desperate when he's trying to get the money off of Bond and stuff. He's a bit more of a pathetic figure than most of the other villains.
and you get some of those like weird villains that have like world domination shit.
Yeah,
this guy's just like a gambling addict that has like a debt to pay, and
yeah, he's just trying to bail himself out, isn't he? Because he's gambled away some of KGB's money.
And the height of the Cold, I guess this was like right at the start of the Cold War too, and like being a kid that was 90s kid, like the Cold War meant nothing to me, like growing up. But I know for generations before me, it meant so much. Like it was such a huge deal.
It's such a huge part of Bond. So that Cold War backdrop and that sort of the spies being an active part, despite the fact that there wasn't really people like James Bond at the time. There wasn't, as far as we know. There was so many moles within British intelligence that they just couldn't risk having any spies because they just kept getting killed. So they just ended up not really having them. There was loads of Russian spies in the UK. There's no English spies really.
That's interesting, and I don't know enough about like the history of it too, but like that's very interesting because they don't teach you so much. I mean, shit, in America, like you do not learn anything but like U.S. history basically.
Yeah,
so if it's like we're definitely not talking about what the British were doing during the Cold War. They're talking about what like the CIA was. So that's always fascinating.
Out of interest, how big a cultural force is Bond in America? I'm never quite sure how much you. And obviously the movies obviously do well over there, but I mean day to day, how much is Bond informing American life?
It's interesting. I think it's less than he used to, or less than a fictional character could. But I think there is something, and Nani State and I always kind of chat about this just, online when we're chilling, and we'll see something, whenever somebody's talking about like America versus England or something, we'll like chat. And I'm like, yeah, like I think there is a romanticizing about the British too in America. So I think that helped James Bond be a huge figure. Like I think it was JFK that like publicly said in the 60s that like From Russia with Love was his favorite novel or whatever. And, that kind of suave, kind of educated, and the accent helps, right? It's very, and at least in America, we treat it as like a novelty or like a posh, like high class thing, right?
So he treats it like a qualification, don't you?
Fucking science experiment.
It equals one American PhD having a British accent.
Just like fake it. The people will just fake it for class. Like John Oliver isn't really British, dude. He just like we just love hearing it from a British person. Like we're just like, oh, they must be really fucking. They must know. Like, so there's that. But I think he has, and I guess it's different too because Bond is supposed to be like a fictional British hero. And in America, I mean, he's a hero, I think, too, but I think it is a little bit less than it was even maybe like 15 years ago. I don't know if it's just because I was younger and a kid. It just feels like the Bond brand maybe isn't as important or as cool even than like maybe it was when I was growing up watching, like I said, Halle Berry come out of that ocean water with her tits. And then like...
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people that I know aren't that into Bond. A lot of people from my generation just not. I think they view it very much as something a bit old fashioned and a bit campy and a bit sort of I think sort of stuffy, I suppose.
That's interesting. And I wonder too if like, is it just because the movies in like the last 15 years weren't as good as like the older movies, or is it because there's just so much stuff now? You could have the Marvel heroes and stuff. You don't have to have this kind of dashing spy character. Or we have millions of spy characters now. I just talked Ethan Hunt, the American kind of spy character.
Yeah.
But that's not like even Ethan Hunt. He did not have the cultural cachet, the cultural importance that James Bond did over the world.
not as an individual figure.
Right.
Like Bourne is probably the closest you get, isn't it? And
yeah, and it's kind of, I don't know why it is. I mean, and then you see all the stuff. I wanted to get to this too, where we're seeing a lot of this. They're trying to whitewash the books. They're trying to do a female James Bond. Like they're trying to, like recast like kind of his legacy or the legacy of the fiction. Once a character grows beyond a certain point, like it is bigger than life, so if you make any changes to it as if it's just a fictional character that you can do whatever you want with, it's like, no, it's more than that now. Like Bond has, over the last 70 years has become more than just like a fictional spy character.
Yeah, I know that there's always lots of talk about them doing a female Bond or a different race Bond or so. I always think they're not going to do that, because that stuff might play okay in the West, but there's a huge international audience for Bond, and like Bond fans in Malaysia don't want a female Bond. I think they've got a very set idea of what Bond is, and so I think Bond's fairly safe as a figure of much tinkering, really. I think he'll always sort of have to be Bond. I could be completely wrong, but I just think the international market for it is so big, and that market is not for a subversion of Bond or a reinvention of Bond. It's for Bond, the guy in the tuxedo.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, like the international appeal. Like you could go to anywhere in the world and mention the name James Bond in English, and everybody that doesn't even fucking speak English would know what you're talking about. They would picture Connery or Brosnan or somebody, in that tux, and they would know exactly what you mean. Like kind of, that's special. Like that doesn't happen every day. Like that has to be decades of like a character coming back up and being beloved in all these different parts of the world, all these different cultures. They still love it. Like,
yeah.
But I was thinking that too, because there's all this talk. There's all this fucking talk about making it a woman or something, and I was just thinking, I was like, would like a female James Bond even work? Like, would it even work? Because I feel like it would change so much of the dynamics. Like,
I mean, it's not James Bond at that point, and I don't mean that they've changed it. I just mean it literally isn't. I mean, James Bond is. It's James Bond. As soon as you make it a woman, it's something else. It's it's a different thing, which could be great. It could be a great thing, but it's not going to be James Bond.
Because it changes. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I think you'd probably want to do, because they're probably going to reboot them again, aren't they? The films. I think do them as period pieces. Set them in the 50s and the 60s when the books are done. It's the only way to make it feel fresh anymore. I think.
Honestly, that sounds fucking great. I was thinking that when I was watching the movie rewatch, because I'd seen it when it came out and seen it a few other times when I rewatched it for this, and I was thinking that too. Like I was like, they set it in present day, 2006, so the tech and all, they had to add these kind of tech scenes into the Casino Royale movie adaptation, and I was like, man, if they did set it in like 53 or something, or 54, like if they set it at like the French 1950s, man, that could have been really cool. That could have been really romanticized. It could have been the cigarettes. I noticed they don't let him smoke. When did they stop having Bond smoke? I don't know. I'm not a big enough Bond autist, but
yeah, I think if you set them then as well, you get rid of the problem of of the tech, and it just would feel fresh. It would feel different, and it would feel you could do them smaller scale, and you can still have them being exciting and have them be good spy films, but I don't know how much appetite there is for, because it has to compete with Mission Impossible and with Fast and the Furious, to be honest. Like that's doing, Fast and the Furious is they're the inheritor of like the Roger Moore era Bond films. They're sort of winking to the camera kind of action spy films, that they've sort of picked up that mantle and stuff. And so rather than competing against that, I think just lean into the spy bit rather than the action.
Yeah. And I was thinking like, okay, if we do that, like, and then if we had a woman come in, like it changes the sexual dynamics, which people say doesn't matter, but I think that matters. Like the fact that he's a horny guy that like can be seduced by beautiful women, like that's one of his big weaknesses, right? Like,
yes. Yeah.
And like, so we take that away from this character. He has to have huge weaknesses. Like, he has to have weaknesses, or like it's not going to be a fun story with this spy having, you know, trials and tribulations and conquering. And then
I think the other thing you would do if you rebooted it to set them at the time is you get rid of mobile phones, which have ruined the spy genre as much as they've ruined the horror genre and so many other genres, because so many stories don't work in a world where people have mobile phones. You know, most of the problems in most of the Bond books could be solved with an iPhone.
Right, when you have a cell phone that pings off a tower every 15 minutes to like give you your exact location to law enforcement, like a local cop could find your location off of like this international spy, like. Yeah, that's fucking... If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. And I guess people hit it for the sexism, right? So they hit it for the racism and the sexism because it was 1950s.
Yeah, which I think, you know, it's you've got to view it in relativity, right? So by modern lens, it's very sexist, but by the lens of 1953, it's maybe quite progressive. His views on women, like he's, you know, as soon as he sits down with, because when he hears that he's going to have to team up with a woman, he's just like, oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah.
But then when he meets her, he's instantly like, no, actually, she seems cool, and you know, she gets it when I'm explaining the card game to her and stuff, and he's instantly won round and really respects her as a sort of fellow agent and stuff. And so, you know, I say, like, you know, it's quite a lot of strong female characters in all the books, and so I think it by 2023 standards, it's quite old fashioned, but by old fashioned standards, it's quite modern.
And that's, I mean, we made this point already, but like you said, yeah, like they're not helpless. Like the female characters, they're not helpless. And even Vesper in this case is almost like a femme fatale in the vein of like the classic pulp spy stuff. But I was thinking like specifically like this kind of like the thing where I'm going to read this paragraph on page 97 in mine, where it's right after he realizes that Vesper got tricked into being kidnapped or whatever.
Yeah.
Where he says he's like chasing after her in the Bentley or whatever. He's like, this was just what he had been afraid of. These blithering women who thought they could do a man's work. Why the hell couldn't they stay at home and mind their pots and pans and stick to their frocks and gossip and leave men's work to the men? And now for this to happen to him, just when the job had come off so beautifully, for Vesper to fall for an old trick like that and get herself snatched and probably held to ransom like some bloody heroine in a strip cartoon. The silly bitch.
Yes.
Yeah, where he's just like, he's angry at the fact, like he's like blaming it the fact that, oh, they put a woman into this and that makes them vulnerable or whatever. But that's like that's only at the halfway point. And like you said, it shifts from being this kind of card game into this kind of romance, almost femme fatale, where they just spend a couple weeks fucking in like these like resort town or whatever on the beach, you know?
Yeah, and then that whole kidnapping scene as well. We later get a different angle on what's really going on there, and she's not actually helplessly being kidnapped.
Right. Yeah. And his assumption, like you said, it almost means like he realizes later that his assumption was wrong too. Like this kind of So even by like 2023 standards, you could say like, well, like he's
learning his lesson,
right? Like he's learning not to be like a sexist pig or whatever kind of thing, like. The silly bitch. Yeah.
How as an American, how do you feel about Felix Leiter as a character? And
I always liked him, and he keeps popping up, right? Like he keeps.
Yes, he's in quite a few of them. Yeah.
And I guess eventually, was it Moonraker where he gets like really brutally.
Live and Let Die.
Live and Let Die. Yeah. Attacked and all that, and was like forever deformed from it. But like, I liked him. And I liked the fact that. It's funny, he was just like there to like help Bond, because like you said, it's about like him being the best card player. So like they're all trying to accomplish the same thing, which is to like hurt this organization to bankrupt them. And then like they have like all the Americans come in and be like, yeah, have the British guy. Here's 10 million to keep buy back in.
And Bond says it. Good Americans are fine people, and most of them come from Texas.
I remember that line. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I'm not from Texas, but yeah. I think that might have been true in the 50s. I don't know. People from Texas, they love the fact that they're from Texas, by the way. They'll let you know.
Yeah.
They'll let you know that they're from Texas a few times.
So after the kidnapping, there's the torture scene, isn't there? Which is quite a big pivotal point in the book. And it's quite extreme, particularly for 1953, and it's and oddly homoerotic as well. For like he cuts the seat out from a wicker chair, and then he's beating his testicles and arse with a carpet beater.
Yeah. And that is kind of like, yeah, like that's kind of. I remember first reading this book for the first time and then rereading it now. It's very brutal torture technique where like you always hear stories. You know, my lifetime, it was always the stories from like Guantanamo or like the Iraq wars. And then, but even like when you hear some of these stories of the KGB and the Cold War, like spies, like what they were doing to people, especially the privates, they would always go after the dick and balls. They would always go after like the toes.
I picked out this quote here, and it says, he had been told by colleagues who had survived torture by the Germans and the Japanese that towards the end there came a wonderful period of warmth and languor, leading into a sort of sexual twilight where pain turned to pleasure and where hatred and fear of the torturers turned to masochistic infatuation. It was the supreme test of will, he had learnt, to avoid showing this form of punch drunkenness. Yeah, there's something, very sort of like, it is quite seductive in a way, the torture scene, isn't it? And he's, and it's like he's pouring the drink into his mouth and stuff. It definitely plays on that sort of anxiety as well, which I think like now it's easy to laugh, it seems a bit gay, but I think that's almost part of this, so to speak, the tension and the horror of it for a 1953 audience, that there is this sexual element to it and this sort of homosexual element to it. It's, it adds another layer of unease for Bond.
And like sexual humiliation is such a huge part of so much torture. You can go back to like medieval times too. The racks and like just the sexual humiliation that was part of a lot of torture is always, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it either. That kind of, and then the Bond after that scene is always worried about like, will his shit work right? Like, can he get a fucking erection after this? Yes. Like he's just been like beating his balls and shit. Just so like, he's like worried about that. And that is something, I think people underestimate that shit, where people, especially in today's culture and all, everybody's dismissive of shit online. We're like, oh, fuck that, whatever. But I'm like, if you can't, like, I know why. I understand why Hemingway put a shotgun in his mouth when he couldn't get an erection any longer. Like, I understand, okay? Like, I understand, and people are talking about that lightly. Like, that is so important. Like, that is so important.
I think, like, particularly for a figure like Bond, it would be as well.
Right, yeah. If you can't fuck, so you can't experience one of the most, basic human things on the planet, like, what's the point? Like, I understand why Hemingway put that gun in his mouth. Like, like
eating your cyanide button.
Right, yeah, exactly. Where it's just like, like that, it's having something and then losing it too. So what it's like. You could use it just the other day and then all of a sudden it's gone. Kind of like, that's, I understand why people get very depressed about that and like kill themselves and shit.
So that's the section after the torture scene, isn't it, where it's mainly him and Vesper. He says staying in a couple of sort of resort towns and drinking and with a sort of growing unease about it, and Bond having a growing unease about his own role as a spy in that. It's the first Bond book, but he's actually deciding to resign towards the end of the book. He's having those second thoughts, and he speaks to Vesper about why he doesn't really want to be a spy anymore. And this thing where he says, Today we are fighting communism. Okay, if I'd been alive 50 years ago, the brand of conservatism we have today would have been damn near called communism, and we should have been told to go and fight that. History is moving pretty quickly these days, and the heroes and villains keep on changing parts. And he's sort of, again, like Bond is more self-reflective than people ever give him credit for. People think of Bond as just this avatar of like British Empire, and obviously that's part of it. But I think, particularly in this book, he really is reckoning with his role as an assassin and with the pointlessness of it. Like we said, if he defeats this guy or he doesn't defeat Le Chiffre, it doesn't really matter. Like it's nothing is changing, and he becomes aware of that in this.
Yeah, I actually had a question about that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, like his lament, right, about good and evil. Like when he's been tortured, he's in the hospital, he'd been asleep, passed out for days, unconscious. They didn't know if he was going to make it. They didn't know if he was going to have his, like sexual function and all that kind of shit. But, he did that. He literally was sacrificing his sexual function because he was a trained spy, where you sacrifice everything to be a spy for the government. But then like you said, this kind of reflection, this kind of good versus evil, like what's the point of me doing this? Like I always thought of myself as a good guy, and like, am I kind of thing, like
and he's just been saved by a Russian agent as well. Like it's, one of the anticlimactic elements of the book is that Bond doesn't get to pull the final trigger on the enemy. He's tied to a chair, and there's that wonderfully described sequence that he talks about. Bond noticed that he suddenly had a third eye, that Le Chiffre has a third eye, and then the eye starts bleeding. He's been shot. And so, yeah, he has just been saved by his enemy. So he's really questioning it.
That's interesting too, with like, I can't, I like pulp stuff. Like I like Philip Marley, Chandler's stuff. I like Ross, I've already said I love Ross McDonald and shit. And like, very rarely do those types of like detective heroes solving the case type thing ever have what Bond had happen, where you said like it's just a lot of luck. Also, like Fleming is very careful to show that like sometimes the plan doesn't work, and then sometimes you just get fucking lucky. Like he was gonna die if the Russian spies weren't after this guy too, basically, and like fortuitous timing just like saved his life essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I guess, is that like a realism? Would you say like kind of a?
I wonder if it's like a thing. I think it's tying into like, if it's hard to remember, but like it's this isn't the first installment of the Bond franchise. It's just a book. Like it's the first installment of the Bond franchise. But when Fleming's writing it, it's just a book, and so it's just, if you think of it as just this one book, that is playing into those themes of Bond's realizations about his own pointlessness and the pointlessness of spycraft. That I think that it's not really his own talent that's responsible for any of the advancements in this, beyond being quite good at cards.
Right, and he even makes like very potable mistakes in terms of not seeing Vesper for what she is, like not underestimating the hands at the table and stuff. Like he's not a flawless, like I know better than everybody else in the room type character. And that would be boring, right? Like if you have just like a know-it-all character. I mean, you run into this like with modern kind of spy and action hero stuff, where we see a lot of movies and shows where the hero is just infallible, and
like a superhero.
Yeah, and they never make mistakes. They don't even get shot, like, or if they get shot, it doesn't matter. Like they can still use their arm fine, even though the tissue's been blown to shreds. The muscle just wouldn't work for weeks, like, but they can just use it, like. Yeah, I mean, but that good versus evil, I think that is, you don't see that so often, and I think even now, like they try to make something like a spy like this, like an evil character, even though like, but I mean, I think he's just like, Fleming's trying to complicate it and show that it's not so clear cut, it's not so black and white. I know that's a cliche. Everybody talks about it with every fucking issue now, every time of a controversy online, but
everything's complicated.
But it is true, like it is something there for it. Like,
yeah, I think it's of all of the Bond books, it's the least gung ho, and it's the least sort of propagandistic. Really, it's the one that's got the bleakest outlook on spycraft.
Yeah, I was thinking the one, and this is when he's talking to Mathis, and he's like covered in bandages, You see, he said, still looking down at his bandages, when one's young, it seems very easy to distinguish between right and wrong. But as one gets older, it becomes more difficult. At school, it's easy to pick out one's own villains and heroes, and one grows up wanting to be a hero and kill the villains.
Yes,
like he said, he was just saved by one of the people he considered a villain. Like right out, the Russian spy saved him technically, like, and then told him, actually gave him kind of ethics in the spy trade too, where he's like, I don't have orders to kill you. That's the only reason you're still alive. Like, cause I didn't get the order and it would be unethical for me to kill you.
He's fallen in love with an enemy as well, with Vesper as well. It's all been thrown in upside down for him. And,
very Shakespearean almost, right? Like falling in love with the forbidden enemy, or like I guess he didn't know it, so he didn't know he was falling in love with her, but and that she was an enemy. But it's kind of tapping into those archetypes, that Shakespearean like forbidden love kind of. Yeah,
and the suicide is similarly tying into that, isn't it? So so you rewatched the film recently. What did you think of that?
The film, honestly, I had mixed feelings on it.
Same.
Where like I remember liking it when it came out originally, and then rewatching it now, almost 20 years later, I guess. Shit, like I wasn't as fond of it. But
no.
I still thought there were, like it was still parts where I was like, oh yeah, I like that. Like it was still like a Bond, movie, and it delivered the goods in a lot of ways. But,
Yeah, I think Daniel Craig is fantastic in it, I think. But I think the film overall doesn't quite have... Although, there's that scene in it where him and Vesper, I think it's maybe just after kidnapping, they're in the bathroom, and he's washing blood off of himself, and she's in the shower like crying, and she's still got the dress on. And it's just not a scene you've ever seen in Bond films before, where like he's really fucked up, and he's like sort of looking in the mirror. He looks like he's about to cry, and he's cleaning blood off of his face, and he isn't sort of calm and collected throughout the whole film, which is something. I think they lean into that idea that, because they are doing Casino Royale, but they do know it's the first part of a franchise, that it very much does it as the birth of Bond. Like, he's not Bond at the beginning of the film, and he is Bond by the end of the film. That the sort of experience with Vesper has turned him into the Bond that we now know.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, and something I read when I was prepping for this, where they said that like the studios, since Brosnan wasn't doing it anymore, and they needed to find a new Bond. Apparently, it took them years to trying to cast a new Bond before they settled on Craig. And I guess the studios wanted to kind of reboot it, so they went back to the original book. They wanted to do the original story of Bond, and they wanted to show you how he got his 00 number and like all that. And they wanted to show, like you said, that kind of darker kind of, these people, like, to be a spy, I mean, takes something from you, like,
the
brutality.
Which I think I feel like they instantly lose that with the next Craig film. Then they just sort of become action films from that on.
Yeah. Hold on, I gotta pee real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Come back here. Because I got a lot of notes on the movie too. Yeah, a lot to talk about. Yeah, give me like 5 seconds here. I've had a lot of fucking coffee, as I have even more. But yeah, like this was Craig, and I remember I started the phrase, and I named the chat this when we were starting, the Blonde Bond.
Yes.
The first blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy as Bond. How is that? Because I remember reading articles when they were casting this, like in the early 2000s, like People Magazine or whatever, and like they were talking about how, the new Bond. Blonde?
Yeah.
Oh man.
He doesn't look blonde though. I swear, you watch it. He does. To me, I don't think he looks blonde. It looks like brown hair. I think because Pierce Brosnan had I think GoldenEye, I think, is fantastic. The first Pierce Brosnan film, and I think Tomorrow Never Dies has got some good moments. But then World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day they were very bad films. I think it was definitely in need of a reboot. And yeah, have you seen Layer Cake, the film? So that's the film that Daniel Craig was in a couple of years beforehand, and you can totally see that was the film. Somebody watching it sort of said, he's Bond, because there's a scene where he has to sneak into somebody's house wearing a black turtleneck with a silenced pistol, and he's sort of with his back against the wall, and it just instantly you think, oh yeah, no, he's Bond. Yeah, it's brilliant. And yeah, I think he is the best part about the film for sure. And yeah, he's a convincing Bond.
And there is like that demeanor too. Like, yeah, like how do you capture that demeanor of the serious, but also he's like, enjoys good meals, he enjoys fine things and women and all these finer things of life, but he's also like this, not necessarily cold-blooded, but he is when he has to be.
Yeah, it's yeah, it focuses nicely on Bond. I think, like, despite it being filled with a few superfluous action scenes, it fundamentally is. It's one of the few Bond films that feels like it's mainly about Bond, rather than about the mission. And Mads Mikkelsen's good in it as well, I gotta say.
That's interesting. Yeah, that it focuses, because it does. Like, I was gonna ask too, because they have that whole like black and white opening, kind of cold open. In this one, where they showing him what he verbalizes it in the novel at the end, where he's telling Vesper, I think, right, how he
he killed 2 people, yeah,
how he got his 00 number with the agency, and he's kind of lamenting about it. But in this one, they just show you that, which I'm like, okay, yeah, you got to do something when you're adapting a movie. But I didn't know how did you feel like showing this kind of 007, how it came to be?
Yeah, I think it's good. And again, it's a strong opening because it's much more brutal than what you've seen. It's much more brutal than any of the violence in Dine of the Day, as to freeze the fight they have in the bathroom, and
yes.
You get the sense that those kills are kind of meaningful both to the plot and to Bond. It doesn't feel like Bond shooting 2 henchmen on an oil rig. It's it's 2 actual murders of people,
and that kind of like how it almost didn't work too, like when, especially that bathroom one, because the other one is he's sitting in the office and he's like, the kind of classic spy, he's broken in and is sitting in the dark, and he's already found like all the weapons that the person keeps in their office, and he's disarmed them, and he's just kind of waiting for them to come. That bathroom scene, he's fighting for his life basically. Like his tuxedo's ripped off, like his shirt, the sinks are broken, there's water spraying everywhere. Like, these guys are literally fighting to the death. And like you said, they show that brutality of 2 men. Basically, whoever wins is gonna die, is gonna live. Not 2 people can live at the end of this, and it is kind of right away. And the fact that they did it in black and white, I mean, because who is this director? Was
is it Sam Mendes? This one, let me check. No, it's Martin Campbell, who also did GoldenEye. And he also did a great miniseries called Edge of Darkness in the 80s, which was like a sort of spy with a touch of science fiction, sort of political thriller on British TV. But yeah, it's well directed, I think.
Yeah. And then of course there's all like these little kinds of like changes, like small things, and you get creative license. Like, I don't want to be like that type of person that's like pushing up the glasses, like, oh, it's not like the novel, therefore it's bad. But like, the little tiny changes where they did that inhaler, that Le Chiffre, they change it in the movie to like an oral inhaler instead of that.
Oh, and it's a nasal one in
Or it's almost like they just got like poppers or something. This guy's like doing like poppers at the card table, like he's like snit or coke or something,
Well, I think so. The inhalers back then were a bit more potent than inhalers now, I think. So I think it is like speed that he's taking in the novel, like sort of Benzo's sort of thing. But it's just an inhaler like the sickly kid would have in your class in the film.
That's what I was thinking, and I was thinking...
It's the Millhouse inhaler.
Right, yeah.
The Millhouse. Right.
And I was thinking that, I was like, okay, I get, you take it. I was like, why did they do that? I guess to make it so that people understood it was an inhaler, maybe. But it does kind of make him, and like you said, it was already kind of like, he's kind of a weaker villain anyway compared to other Bond villains. Mm-hmm. But like, I was like, what? This guy's hitting an inhaler like he's got a fucking asthma attack or something at the table. It's like, it does kind of make him a little less sinister than the nasal inhaler. Like if he was doing that, the
nasal inhaler would be a bit more, it'd be a bit more like Blue Velvet, wouldn't it?
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I did. I thought exactly the same thing. Blue Velvet with the fucking oxygen, like huffing oxygen. Yeah. Yes, yes. I was thinking that. I was like, huh, strange choice. Whatever. It doesn't make or break the movie. But I was just like, I don't know if I would have done that.
Did you think if Ian Fleming had known about parkour, he would have put a parkour chase in the book? It's only the lack of his knowledge of it that meant that he didn't. That is a very long parkour scene in that film.
I wanted to ask you about that because the first hour of the movie really is dramatized action that isn't in the novel. You know?
Yeah, because there's the parkour scene and there's the airport thing, right?
It's like a huge shootout, yeah, where he's breaking the embassy in Uganda or something, and very spy. Like you said, I think that was because at this point it had been, 60, 50 years since they had been making Bond movies, and they needed to include the, like you said, huge action sequences, almost comical in some sense, but.
Yeah, and as funny as the parkour thing is, it is at least physical and stunt based compared to like an invisible car that you had in the previous film, or him surfing down a waterfall and stuff like that you had in the previous. It's it is him getting bashed around personally.
I did think the part that made me laugh out loud was when he's chasing that guy in the embassy and he bursts through the drywall.
Oh, yeah.
Like I literally laughed out loud. I was like, I have to bring this up.
Rutger moment.
Yeah, and it was almost kind of it almost went into like joking comedy at that point, but like it didn't go fully into that. But I was kind of like, I got to bring this up to Nani when we talk, man. Like I got because I was. And I see why they added that. Like I see why, if you're making a huge big budget blockbuster that you want to make millions off of, worldwide releases. I understand you gotta give the goods kind of thing, give a big spectacle. But I didn't know how I felt about the hour-long action sequences that, like, before we get to the plots of it. I just want your thoughts. How did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge action fan in general in terms of cinema, and obviously they're the first Bond films that are coming out after the Bourne films, and so they're very much taking that editing style of like super choppy, like in all those films you barely see Bond connect a punch in a single shot. Like you just have a shot of his fist, and then it'll cut to the enemy's face, and then it'll cut to another shot of his fist, and then it'll cut to a long shot. Everything's hyper edited, and that does my head in a bit. I remember in the cinema finding the car chase a bit like. Although the car crash at the end of the chase is fantastic. There's so many flips.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I've never been a huge action fan. So yeah, I remember in the cinema thinking, oh, can we get to the Baccarat game now?
Yeah. I was thinking that too, because the first 30-40 minutes of it, you're like, oh, cool, whatever. But then like there's like a 20-minute almost lull before we get there, where it's like, oh, is this still going on? Where he's chasing this guy. What the fuck's this guy in Uganda have to do with anything? Like kind of. But when you brought up the Bourne stuff, I thought I didn't even think about that. Like the kind of Paul Greengrass, the innovations that happened right there with the kind of the fight, with just shaking the camera, like the handheld, and that was the fight scene. So you couldn't even focus. It was so disorienting watching some of that. I didn't even think about that in terms of the trends.
It's sort of it's a feedback loop, isn't it? Because obviously Bourne doesn't exist without the Bond.
Yeah.
Franchise, but then Bourne becomes massively successful, and so all the sort of stylistic elements of that and of things like 24 and that could get kind of looped back into James Bond. It becomes it's taking its children's ideas.
And I'm always fascinated by that. Like I want to do an episode eventually on Bloom's The Anxiety of Influence, where like you can't avoid this kind of, because this movie, even though it was the first Bond novel, like you said, it had already been influenced by like 20 other Bond films that came before it, like all the other spy movies that came before it, the Bournes, the Mission Impossibles, and then that's just the 90s stuff, early 2000s stuff. I mean, all the spy shit that was inspired by Bond and then pushed the boundaries, and then you have to, I mean, it is interesting how that happens, and it's really unavoidable. It's almost like an osmosis kind of, you're absorbing all these things around you, and then it comes out in these weird ways. But that's fucking interesting, man. Yeah, the dynamic between Vesper and Bond in the movie version. What did you think?
I think one thing they do in the Daniel Craig Bonds, which they certainly didn't do in the Roger Moore era, is they generally give him sort of age appropriate Bond girls. It's like, it's not like by the time you get to some of those later Roger Moores, like For Your Eyes Only, you've got like a 19-year-old Bond girl, and you've got Roger Moore at that point pushing 60 years old, and his like liver spotted hand caressing this like beautiful young girl's face. And I think like with Daniel Craig, they always match him up with, I don't know what the age difference is between him and Eva Green, but they seem, you know, at least in the film they seem about the same age, and it's sort of she does feel like a, you know, it does feel like somebody Bond would fall for rather than just want to sleep with. Like you can see that, you know, she's sort of what he would want. And I think she's fantastic as an actress.
Yeah. And then that first scene, I guess, like I was thinking, because you have that big hour-long kind of, you know, the backstory in the beginning, and then like he's getting where they're setting up why they're like, I do think the writers and the directors were trying to set up why Bond and MI6 and the CIA and everybody was trying to bankrupt this, you know, terrorist organization through a card game. So they're setting up that, and like they're kind of trying to set up the villain's financial woes too. So I get all that, but I just remember seeing that first scene with him and Vesper, and I was like, this is, it bordered on cringe watching it now. Like they're kind of back and forth at that dinner, that train car or whatever that they're having dinner on, and
yeah,
it's like a weird like early 2000s psychoanalysis back and forth where they like profile each other.
Also marred by the sort of weird product placement thing that she has to sort of mention that he's got an Omega watch.
Yeah. He was an Oxford man. Yeah.
I think as well the suicide of her at the end is, you know, it feels less because it's more of an action-packed way for her to die, isn't it? It feels in a way less emotionally impactful. The fact that in the book it's just happens off page. You know, Bond wakes up and she's already died. Is, you know, compared to him diving into a Venice building.
I did, and that's what I was thinking. That's why I was kind of. They set it up, and I wonder why. I mean, obviously they were trying to change it up a little bit, right? But it does kind of show this kind of almost adversarial relationship between Vesper and Bond at first in the movie, because in the book, you know, I think they kind of show Vesper as being intimidated. She's trying to prove herself, you know, this 00 agent, and here, not that they tried to make her like overly tough or anything, but like it was almost adversarial, where like she was getting flustered with Bond, you know, that kind of I mean, it's subtle, but I think it does, like you were getting at, like I think it does change Vesper's character a little bit, and then it does change the tragedy at the end there, where her death a little bit, because she's, I don't know, I guess these two spies that didn't really want to work together, and I get it, you know, it kind of adds like a quirky kind of, it changes it up a little bit. I think if I were going to say why they tried to do it, I'd be like, all right, well, they were trying to freshen it up, right? This is like an old conversation from the 50s. They were trying to change up the sex dynamics. They were trying to change up, you know, make it fresh, make it for today. You know, they were setting it in 2006, present day at the time. But yeah, there is a weird kind of less sympathetic angle to it. I mean, I don't know. This is what I picked watching it, you know, stoned late at night before we recorded this.
Yeah, I think it's a modern way of, you know, and also a very cinematic way of doing it. That I think a lot of people feel you can't show a character being attracted to another character, particularly a female character being attracted to a male character, without that seeming like an act of submission. Like, and I think so. She, you know, I think that's why there's that she is more aloof and she is more standoffish. I think if she was instantly attracted to him, I think for a lot of audience members that would instantly make her a less serious character, which I think which says more about the audience members than it does about her. But I think there is that thing that in order to take a female spy character seriously, you people want her to be a female version of James Bond, rather than she's quite a different character in the book. She's not that. She is quite infatuated with him almost. You can tell during the scene where they're getting the champagne and the caviar and stuff that she's really into him. But yeah, she's a little bit more aloof in the film, but that just sort of always seems to be how it goes.
Yeah, like, and yeah, you know, I don't want to be that guy that's like, well, the novel, it was like, yeah, because you know you're allowed to change shit up. You know, you're allowed, if you're adapting something, you can change it up. But like, yeah, that was something that, and like you said, it did affect the ending a little bit with the with him discovering her dead or the suicide or whatever. But
yeah,
same thing with the villain, and we talked a little bit where they kind of early on they kind of make the villain a little weaker in the movie, even weaker than we see him in the novel, where like they have that like Ugandan guy like come to him and like hold the gun on him in the middle of that like break in the game, you know, and Bond kills them and hides the bodies. It almost seems like the Schiff's clients tend to like they're like depicted as more villainous than he is, or
it's one of the few Bond stories where the villain doesn't have a master plan. It's Bond that's got a master plan. It's MI6 that has a master plan. It's not that Bond is uncovering a plan. It's the villain is uncovering Bond's plan to take him out, and so that sort of instantly makes the villain a bit more of a defensive character. It's not like the villain isn't really one step ahead of Bond. Bond's one step ahead of him most of the time. Which is it's a different way of doing it, but it does mean that it doesn't quite have the impact of a villain as somebody like Blofeld might have.
Yeah, and I noticed that with that hour-long edition, basic, because if they did this the straight novel, this would be like a 90-minute thriller movie, like not really like the big action-packed 2-hour blockbuster that they were going for. But like when they have Bond sleep with that one like drug lord's wife or something, or and then they do try to show that like that was Le Chiffre getting information or whatever from that woman, because Bond was a little loose lips when he was having sex with her or whatever, and so they do try to imply that like he was like in the novel where like he knows more than Bond does, or Bond's underestimating him, and that's the downfall for a lot of their plans that they've been trying to do. So I don't know, I just thought something like that, but I mean it was this kind of I don't know why they blurred together in my head. I kept thinking like the Javier Bardem villain, and that's the later movie, right? Is that Quantum of Solace? Is that which I haven't seen since I saw it in the cinema. I really didn't like Quantum of Solace. Yeah, it was weird. It was like it didn't make sense, and then like his face was gone or whatever.
Yeah, I tried to forget that, I think.
They always get like these Oscar winners to like play the villains and shit in these movies now, and if they're either hit or miss too, like they're just like picking different like the Rami Malek or what just did that, the recent one. That's what I mean. I'm not a huge Bond guy, so I need somebody who is. When I was doing this, I was like, I need somebody who's knows this better than I do.
So you've been working your way through the Bond books. So you've done the first 4.
I did the first 4, and I was doing that just for like, because I was like, hey, I like this. This is a classic thing, and I'm really into the pulp stuff, and I had never actually read the books, so I was like, I want to do this. So I started building them out, and I guess like they were all part of that 2012 one with the kind of 007 graphics like this. They all kind of look like this. And I got to the 4th one here, and then on Amazon, you and I were chatting about this, where all of a sudden they were all unavailable. And then like a couple months later, they made the announcement that they're whitewashing all of these, and then you're going to only find these ones at like used bookstores now. So I did have a damper on that.
Are the publishing rights owned by Amazon now? Because I know Amazon's bought the film rights. I don't know if the publishing rights are also. I don't know if they own Bond outright, but they now own all the Bond films and the Bond film license.
Yeah, I don't know if listeners out there know, write it in. But like I know, because that's what happened with Doll, right? Like the estate was sold to like Netflix or a huge conglomerate, so then Netflix owns the estate or something now, or their parent company does or something, and like so now they can do whatever they want. I don't know, because I know Fleming, he did have it set up with like his own estate and all that, but when the family's falling hard times, they got to sell off that estate or whatever now that he's dead. I don't know. Are you trying to look it up?
Yeah. I can look it up, because I wonder if they also own Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which he wrote.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Talk about classics.
Yeah, which it's a car full of gadgets when you think about it.
Yeah. And like that's interesting too with the Fleming listeners, where there's like he talks about Bond doing this in a lot of the books too, where they talk about like the devices that the different intelligence agencies and militaries were trying to develop everywhere from Russia to the UK to the US to like all these different places that were basically against the the Cold War, the two sides of it were all trying to develop these weapons that could be used to spy, this, dampen sound, kill people without traces, like the cane in the book that they don't use in the movie, like the
Yes.
gun cane that they sneak into the casino and put it, Bond's back or whatever to threaten him.
So I found it. Amazon haven't bought it. It's Ian Fleming Publications Limited, which owns the rights to the author's work, has employed sensitivity readers to look at the text and make recommendations for changes. The changes include the removal of the N-word in almost all cases. I want to know which ones they thought, oh no, that's too essential to the plot. That one. And they've added a disclaimer to the books that says, this book was written at a time when terms and attitudes which might be considered offensive by modern readers were commonplace. A number of updates have been made in this edition while keeping it as close as possible to the original text and the period in which it is set.
Is it Diamonds Are Forever, the one that has like a lot of the N-word? Or like the one where they're like in Africa?
Yes, there's quite a bit of it in that, and there's a fair bit of it in Live and Let Die as well. It also says they just, in general, removed references to the ethnicity of a number of minor characters. So I guess, like, when he's talking about what ethnicity the waiter was or the bellboy or whatever, that's been excised.
Right, because that one is in like the Caribbean, right? Like that one that's
some of Dr. No is in the Caribbean, and some of Live and Let Die is as well.
And in this one, they try to make, I guess they kind of take out the Jamaica angle in the movie for Casino Royale, but like where he's supposed to be like some playboy from Jamaica or whatever. That's like his cover.
Yes, that's his cover story. Yeah,
they show him going to the Bahamas, but not Jamaica in like the movie, which whatever, like a different kind of Caribbean island or something. But yeah, that's interesting. I am curious, and I mean, you and I have chatted about this. I've been posting about it. You've been posting about it. Everybody that's fucking been posting about it with this, like, I keep asking myself, why are they doing this? Like, why are they trying to change these words? Why are they trying to, like I said, appeal to sensitivities with these sensitivity readers and things like that? And I know the arguments that a lot of people make are saying, oh, well, they're just trying to sell books because they're not selling as well. I doubt they're not selling as well. I mean, I'm sure they're not selling as well as they did 30 years ago, like all books, but are they really, like the Roald Dahl stuff, are those books really not selling? Like, you thought you had to, like, chop them up?
So, I'm against all of it. I see the argument more with the Roald Dahl one, and I can imagine some parents reading them to their children and grimacing a little bit at some of the descriptions in there. And not that I think they should remove them, but I kind of get the business case there. But if somebody is picking up Diamonds Are Forever in 2023, that, like we've already said, like, lots of people are so dismissive for Bond for being sexist, for being sort of imperialist. I think, like, if you're going to go into the book, you surely know that already. And I can't imagine that the odd ethnic descriptor would make somebody think, well, I'm never reading another Bond book again, because I don't think those people would have picked up a Bond book in the first place.
That's the interesting part, is that nobody reads anymore. There's like a very tiny percentage of the population that reads, and they're trying to save us from like seeing like outdated terms or like a racist, what we would consider a racist description of something, like a unfairly racist kind of portrayal or something.
And as you say, it's whitewashing. It's pretending that the past had the same supposedly perfect morals that the present has. It's sort of, it's pretending that people never did use, derogatory terms or blunt descriptors of people. It's it's so odd. And you think, if they're doing it to,
no, sorry,
carry on. Oh, just if they're doing it to Bond, they'll do it for everything.
yeah, exactly. Especially when you think of, like, well, how old is Bond supposed to be in this? Like, I know we never really get his age, but he's supposed to be like 30s, 40s, right? 30s, 40s.
Yeah, I think probably late 30s. Yeah.
Like that, like in the 50s. Like, so this person was literally growing up. Like, he would have grown up. Like, and especially in like the America, like the segregated America. Like, that's where he grew up, like, kind of thing. Fleming, like all these guys, like they grew up in this era. Like, it was just normal. Like, and like you said, it is kind of a disservice to the history if we're actually trying to acknowledge what happened and how we overcame it or something, or, to say that, oh, this is just the way it always was. It is Soviet, like it is Soviet in that way. Where,
absolutely, and they'll come for the films as well. It won't just be the books. It'll be, particularly with the rise of the AI and stuff. It'll be so easy to replace a character or to remove a cigarette from someone's hand, or all these. I think there's gonna be lots of little changes that will creep in to the films as well as the books.
I was going to say that too. They took the cigarettes out. When did the cigarettes stop? Because I was thinking back, I don't remember Pierce Brosnan smoking much in those 90s movies either, but I haven't seen him in a while. So like, when did they stop having Bond pull out those cigarettes when he was...
yeah, that's interesting. When did they...
It would make sense if it was in the 90s, because that was like the big tobacco wars, at least in the US and shit.
But in Dine of the Day, he's puffing away on a cigar when he's in Cuba, for sure. Yeah.
It's weird how cigars are allowed. Like, it's even in the US, there's all these taxes and shit on cigarettes and stuff because they're trying to like make people not smoke. But cigars are always exempt. Like, and I think it's because all the politicians like smoke them and shit, so they don't want to have them banned and like taxed. You can still order those online. You can't order cigarettes or vape online, but you can order cigars.
Can you advertise cigars as well?
I don't think you can do it on TV or billboards like tobacco, but you can, like, if you go to the websites, you can order cigars in the mail, but you can't do any other tobacco products, but you can do cigars and pipe tobacco. And very strange.
Interesting.
Very strange.
Because they say in the opening chapter of Casino Royale, he lights his 70th cigarette of the day.
Right, yeah.
In the casino.
The chain smoking.
Think about how yellow Bond's fingers must be.
The interiors of the walls, The one who, like, heavy indoors, my grandmother, everybody of that generation, my grandparents were smokers, and, like, my grandmother's house was just yellow. Like, all the walls were just, like, yellow, and, like, it reeked, and, like...
Have you got to Thunderball yet? Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
Because there's the beginning of Thunderball is Bond checking into a health spa, and so as part of that, they sort of give you a rundown of what his lifestyle is like and what his eating and drinking habits are and stuff. And it does not paint a healthy picture.
They do that in one of the Brosnan James Bonds, where he's like going under a medical eval, and they're like, "Oh, his liver is shot to shit." Like, he must be doing that to himself, like. Kind of thing. But again, I don't think I remember him ever pulling out a cigarette, or maybe I'm just...
Well, I'll have to check that
because it is so important to it. It's important to the atmosphere. It's important to the... Like you said, if they were to do it as like a period piece, you have to include that, like a Scorsese. Yeah, you have to, absolutely, where it was just everybody was doing it all the time in every room, every building. Like, you didn't ask permission to smoke in somebody's house. You just like... My grandparents used to do that. So if we rented like a beach house every year, and when my grandparents were still alive, we would go down and go to the ocean every summer or whatever for a week in a beach house. And it was a non-smoking house. My grandmother would just set up an ashtray like in the kitchen and just be like smoking, and her friends would come over and she would just be, smoke in this non-smoking house or whatever.
Brilliant.
Till the day she died. And it was just part of it. The drinking, all of that. So it was very 50s. Like, it was... Like you said, it was a fantasy. It was kind of this indulgent stuff. Like, and I don't know enough about the U.S. side of it in terms of the rationing. I don't know how long that lasted. But I guess the U.S., it was spared most of the destruction that all of Europe had during the war. So I don't know if they had to ration as long. So everybody in the U.S. was enjoying indulgent shit at that point.
Yes, I'm not sure. Yeah, because certainly... I've got a copy of a cookbook from the late 50s, British cookbook, and it's the bleakest thing you've ever seen compared to what Fleming's talking about. It's like, it's just like lumps of peas and ham in gelatin with like a bunch of prawns and mayonnaise around it. Like, there's no caviar.
Yeah. I said my only experience with the English cuisine is I went to England with my family when I was young, probably like 2003-ish. So I was like, 13, if that. I barely remember most of it. And then I just have Gordon Ramsay restaurants here in Vegas. Like Gordon Ramsay's like British like dishes or whatever. And I'm like, they're really good. Like, what's everybody talking about? The mushy peas, they're pretty good. Yeah, that's crazy. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/HeavyBoard. Heavy Board. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. It's almost crazy to think, too, like how it wasn't even that long ago. It wasn't even that fucking long ago, and we're already starting to whitewash that piece of it. Like, we're starting to, like, try and take things. We're trying to, I think it is, they're trying to denigrate it in some way. And I know it's like, oh, a vague they or whatever, because it is this kind of a cultural milieu, right? But, like, people, they're trying to take it down a notch. I think, like, they're trying to tell you this is bad and you shouldn't like it. And, you know, like, they're trying to defame the legacy, deface it in some way, you know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, whether it's deliberate or whether it's just that there's now a class of people making these decisions who don't value art, who don't value it as anything more than product, as you know. And so, if you can shave some of the edges off the product, then you can sell it to a slightly younger audience, or you can, you know, then I think like there's people don't always have the best intentions, but sometimes or they have good intentions, but they don't care that it's art or literature. It's just a product, in the same way that, you know, I don't know anything about baseball cards, so if you put me in charge of the baseball card business, I'd probably make a lot of decisions that pissed off people that were really into baseball cards, because I don't know what's sacred, I don't know what they look for. And I think there's probably a lot of people in publishing houses and film studios and stuff who don't have that appreciation for it as anything more than product. And so,
and there's like an embarrassment to it. There's like, they're like apologizing for it or something. Like, they're like, I mean, and again, it's hard to pinpoint because it is just kind of this atmosphere of a bunch of different shit that's making people do this. So, you know, I don't think we're going to get an answer, listeners, but I'm just like, it does feel like there is this kind of, I've been talking about this a lot. Like, there feels like there's this kind of death attitude around literature and art, like, all the time. And I don't know if I'm just doom scrolling, you know, like on Twitter or whatever, but it does feel like there's this kind of like lament for the fact that these arts even existed or something. They're like, oh, well, that was a different time, it was bad, like, kind of thing. And I'm like, what? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah,
you know? Like,
it's just as sort of like, as if the acceptable position is to be like, well, you shouldn't care about it because it's just film, it's just TV and stuff like that. Well, you obviously care enough about it to edit it. You obviously think it's powerful enough to be worth censoring. So I should think it's powerful enough to not censor.
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of this, yeah, like we're one, I think it's this weird paradox of we're pretending it has more power than it does, while also knowing that it actually does have a lot of cultural impact. Like, yeah, like it's like this.
While also making it seem like anyone that has a problem with editing it is somehow a loser for caring about what they're doing with the, you know, well, why'd you care what they're doing with the children's,
right.
But why'd you care what they're doing with James Bond book? It's yeah, nothing's sacred.
Well, even that, like, they say, why do you care? It's like, oh, because I fucking care about like the history of this. Like, I care about preserving this stuff, because not only that, this goes back to what we said in the very beginning. Like, Bond is a cultural icon, and he's a cultural icon through not just in British culture. Like, it's American. It's all over the fucking world. Like, people like all over the world know who this guy is and what, you know, the kind of atmosphere around him is. Like, it is the spy archetype basically now. Like, he's become that. Like, and to just brush that off, to pretend that we can make it different all of a sudden or something. It's like, you guys, and it's
once you open the floodgates as well. It's like, well, once you've done it once you've taken out a couple of words, it's like, well, in 5 years' time, will we just be taking out all the cigarettes from it as well, from the books, or will we be taking out any of the sex scenes and stuff like what? There's always going to be something that you'll find. You know, once you start editing it, there's no end to that. There's no edge to that.
Especially with, like, it's like, yeah, if you're a true believer, if you believe that you're saving the world by editing these books, whitewashing them of offensive material, offensive words, or whatever, like, you know, like it's really kind of an absurd position to hold. Like if you believe that we're going to change the world through censoring old books from an old time, I don't know how you can square it. Yeah.
It's a squarely ahistorical as well, isn't it? Because it's a belief that the present moment is the final moment, that we've reached it. We've decided this is how we feel about women. This is how we feel about race. This is how we feel about, you know, smoking. Everything is right here in 2023. You know, from people who in 3 years' time will be happy to shift all of those goalposts. But we have to pretend when we're talking to them that no, they totally believe it. They totally believe that now is the time. Now is where we've got it all right. We all worked it all out. just this year, we just got it. We just got it all in place, and now we can start making edits.
It is a hubris. Yeah, it's like a hubris on that. Like, yeah. I'd say smoking, yeah, they're gonna come for that. They already are. Like I noticed this just a couple years ago, like on like Netflix stuff. When you're watching something, it'll say rated this for smoking, like rated, you know, TVMA for smoking and foul language, nudity, and then it has smoking. I'm like, smoking is a it's like now like an R-rated or a PG-13 rating for smoking. Like, holy crap! Like,
yeah,
are Brits as anti-smoking as Americans?
Oh, he's into smoking? Not hugely. I mean, lots of people don't like to smoke. But yeah, I mean, have you? Is it national, the smoking ban over there, or is it state by state, different places?
State by state. In 2007,
because we've basically had no smoking indoors since about 2007. Anyway,
yeah, that's when
like any restaurant. Yeah,
because I remember it was. One of the things I remember, because I was a kid going over to the UK, and we went to, you know, we went to London obviously as a family, and then we went to Glasgow, and there were some other like cool Edinburgh, like cool, you know, historical areas. You want to see the castles, you want to see all the cool shit over there, and like, you know, that was fun. I remember my parents, you know, and my parents are non-smokers, listeners. They had never smoked in their life, kind of thing, and they were disappointed when I started, and it was like this kind of. They kept complaining the whole time because the U.S. at that time, like 2003, was just at the end of this kind of tobacco wars of the 90s where they had banned it everywhere, but it hadn't reached the U.K. yet. So you could still be people just smoking in the airports and stuff. And my parents would be like, "Oh my God," you know, like, "Oh, it smells." Like, and I'd just be like, what's all? That's cool. Like, but I guess it catches up with everybody. Yeah. So now it's no indoor smoking anywhere. Man, that wasn't long ago either. Like you could still. And when I lived in Louisiana, like I grew up in Maryland here in the U.S. in the States, and it was like right around that time, no smoking anywhere indoors. They called what they called the Clean Indoor Air Act of like 2007 and shit. And they would even the smoking sections. You couldn't even have smoking sections anymore. Anywhere. The only exception I think in the States right now is like casinos, and even a lot of the casinos there's sections, not in Vegas here, but like there's a lot of the other ones there's like, oh, this is the smoking section of the casino, and they don't have all the games here, and you can't, you know, type thing. But you know, in Vegas it's just smoke everywhere kind of thing. But when I lived in Louisiana, you could still smoke. It was like place by place. Some of the places would have no smoking, but then like it wasn't a statewide or countywide or ban or something like that. Then now it's like an R. It's like a fucking giving you a PG-13 rating. Like that's gonna just make kids want to do it more. Like Jesus, if you're making it taboo. Absolutely. And I think that didn't that something come out like it spiked or something.
What tobacco? Well, I mean, vape usage is increasing, isn't it? About actual tobacco, but yeah, certainly is now. Yeah, that's so weird now that there's generations of people who've never smoked but who do vape. Like there's something that's originally sold as a way to help you quit now just becomes a new addiction for a new marketplace of people who've never cared about tobacco, but now they're addicted to vaping.
It's getting even weirder with those pouches, and now you're seeing it online a lot. I'm sure you're seeing this too with like people that are just like, oh yeah, I just do Zyn pouches, and I'm like, oh
yeah, everyone at the office where I work is doing that. Oh. Well, I tried them once. It's horrible.
Yeah. Like when you're somebody who started smoking and you're trying to go to vaping or the pouches to stop, you know, like that. Like it's always not as good. Like you're just kind of like, oh my God, like
nothing hits the same.
Exactly. It's one of the few pleasures on earth, and now we're giving PG-13 ratings for it. Like it's like seeing a pair of tits or something. Like yeah, fucking crazy, dude. This is listeners. This is a PSA. Start smoking. No.
Starts making 70
Yeah,
cigarettes
70.
a day, like James Bond.
Oh yeah. I mean, and everybody who smokes and you gamble, you know, if you're in a casino, especially those ones where like nowadays where they're like pumping oxygen into the fucking room,
Yes,
so you're getting high off of it. Like as you're doing, you're just like puffing away. You can just go through packs of cigarettes, sitting at the table, getting stoned. Yeah, it's fucking great. One of my questions, I have a couple final questions here. Of just like book versus movie type shit. Does the movie, and you know, what do you think on this? Does the movie capture the spirit of the book and like the spirit of Bond and all that?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's brilliant as a film, but yeah, I think it's in terms of what they were trying to do with the film, of trying to take it back to the beginning and try and reset it and try and make Bond serious again. I think it succeeds pretty well. I think as a straight adaptation of the book, it feels a bit bloated almost. Like the book is so snappy, as you said, it's only a few scenes really. That adding the parkour chase and the airport stuff, it just it sort of slows it down a bit. But
the defibrillator, I guess we didn't even talk about that. Like the
it's again, it's just him leaving the casino is the main problem with that. It's just like it just breaks up the action.
And you know, it's funny, as I wouldn't have noticed this if I wasn't rewatching the Mission Impossible ones. Mission Impossible 3, which came out the same year, 2006-ish.
Right.
They have a scene with that where they're putting chips in the brain or whatever to kill them now, and like they have to like kill themselves to like short circuit it with like a defibrillator and then bring themselves back. It's like a plot line in the Mission Impossible 3 ones.
Oh, okay.
So I wonder if they added that in there because it was just like a thing that was happening like at the time, like just like, well, he's gotta die and then bring himself back with this defibrillator, like that they keep in his glove box. Yeah. But yeah, I would say too. I think it did that spirit, and I get why, you know, you always see those hardcore fans of any type of IP. When a movie is made, you know, the fans are pissed. What they're really pissed about is this, like the spirit of it. Did it capture the essence, that thing that's so hard to actually portray and keep right? Like, and that's hard to do. So I have sympathy for filmmakers and writers that are trying to do that on the screen. I think they're genuinely trying, but you know, it doesn't always work. So it is always nice to see when you can at least, even if like you said, you don't think the movie's that good, you can look at somebody like Craig and be like, you know, I think Craig gave it his all, man. Like he really
absolutely
did like try to do all this stuff. And yeah, so I think it does too. Like there's kind of this spirit, even if there is a little bloat to it. I think that's a good word for it. Book or movie better if you had to pick?
I think book for this one. Yeah, it's not. I don't think that's true of every Bond book. I think there's definitely some films of them that are superior to the books. But yeah, with this one, I think book over movie.
Yeah, I would have to do the same. Like, and it's I always try to avoid being a purist in that sense. Like I'm not. But there is something to how fast that book reads, how clean it is, how like 7 scenes, just sharp. Hit. Here we go. And like I reread it in like 2 days, like 2 sittings, or you know, an hour of reading, and you can read the whole book, and it's still gives you that thrill, even though it is just over a card game. That was something I couldn't believe. I was like, Fleming managed to make this card game suspenseful. Like,
yeah, I mean, you can see why it was a hit. You can see why he ended up writing another one. Like it's punchy.
They all are too, yeah. But then, like, I mean, it very rarely is a movie better than a book, kind of. Usually, there are exceptions, right? There are rare exceptions, and where we get blown away. But yeah, it's always, and Bond's a weird one too, because like there's so many book adaptations, but then they have original storylines in the movies too. That like they just make fictional movies or, you know, new stories out of the same characters.
Yeah, like I'd say GoldenEye is one of the best Bond stories, and that's not from a book. It's just it's just a film story. But I think it's, in terms of a Bond story, it's one of the better ones. And
like that, like everybody talks GoldenEye. You know, my first introduction, I played the video game on N64 before I saw the movie. Like, because I was a kid.
Amazing, life changing that.
Yeah. And that's like the culture, like it's bigger than just a novel or a series of novels. It's bigger than just these movies with, you know, a bunch of different actors that have played them over the years and stuff. It's video games, it's memorabilia, it's costumes, it's, you know,
Did you ever play the Mission Impossible N64 game?
No, I didn't.
That's fantastic, and it's one of the first spy games to actually have you doing some spying. You're not just shooting people. There's a scene in it which is really, I think, influential on the later Hitman games, where you just at an embassy party and you have to go and meet a contact, get some poison from them, go and get a drink, put the poison in the drink, give it to an ambassador, follow him into the toilets when he's sick, knock him out, take his clothes, put a mask on, and then get back up the stairs of the embassy to the upper floors and stuff. And it's a proper spy mission. It's like you don't use a gun at all. You just have to. So, and then the whole time you're doing it, there's a CIA agent that's trying to take you out. So you have to make sure you're never in the same room alone with her and stuff. It's a real lost gem, actually.
Yeah, that actually sounds like it was probably went under the radar with with GoldenEye coming out or whatever. With the damn.
Yeah, that's great.
That's fucking awesome, dude. Yeah, that's fucking awesome. That was all I had, man. Did we miss anything?
Yeah, no, I think that's covered. That's great to talk about it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts or anything, Nani?
No, I think just if you're someone who's even slightly interested in the James Bond films, you should definitely read some of the James Bond books. I think it's I'm always amazed by how many people I meet who say they're really big Bond fans and they've never read the books. A friend introduced me to her boyfriend the other day, and he was talking about how much he loved James Bond. And I was chatting about James Bond, and then brought the books. Oh, never read any of them. I said, but you seem to love it. So yeah, I think if you're out there and you've seen a few Bond films and you like Bond, check out some of the books, because it's not quite what you expect, and you
And they're not like the typical, like they're not like a Stephen King level like corniness either. They're very sharp. No. They're very clean. They're very like Hemingway inspired is what I always think right away. Like they're very, they're not what you think. They're not this kind of brash kind of, and like you said, even this Bond you get to see him broken in a lot of ways too, that you don't see him broken in a lot of those movies where he's just like the hero. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think you want to be Bond by the end of this book. I think you maybe do, reading the first chapter, you think, oh, he seems cool. But I think, I don't think many people would want to swap places with him by the time you get to the final page of Casino Royale.
And I wonder if Fleming felt that too, being like kind of a spy during the. Well, I guess he was in World War II too, wasn't he? Like he was.
Yeah, he had some plan to get Aleister Crowley to pretend to defect. Aleister Crowley's a British magician, and to get him to pretend to defect and then give false astrological readings to Hitler, which would be fed to him by the intelligence service, so that they would then influence Hitler, because they knew Hitler was into astrology, that they would feed these false astrological readings. But then in the end, they did this thing called D-Day instead, which apparently worked a lot better. Worked a lot better than Fleming's plan. There's a theoretical alternate universe out there where they decided to, much as in Casino Royale, they bank everything on the card playing ability, that they would bank the entire war effort on one sort of British opium addict's ability to.
It's like this is what like the intelligence agencies are all doing. Yeah. Like, just like, well, what if we beat him at cards? Like that'll really get his ego. Like, that'll break him. Like,
just do a Scrabble game.
Yeah, that's fun. Fucking great. Well, Nani State, this has been fucking awesome. Thank you so much for doing it.
Lovely to talk to you.
Yeah. Drop your handles. Where can people find your stuff and your music?
So on Twitter, I'm at the Nani State, which is the and then Nani Nani and then State.
The British spelling,
And you can find my music is Wrong Circles. So that's Wrong WRONG, Wrong Circles. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, whatever. And I also post songs on Twitter quite often. I write songs about mutuals on Twitter and post them. So you can find those as well.
Fantastic. Check out Wrong Circles. Give Nani State a follow. Give Heavy Board a follow. Listeners, this has been another episode of Heavy Board. And we'll see you later.
It's brilliant.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile.
No!
In a
shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored.
I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.